Dr. Jaffe, the helpful non-complement activating antibodies, can you explain their role in protection? How is it that they are helpful and protective? And is that not a burden on the immune system?
Very important question, increasingly important question, which is, what are these neutralizing? What are these helpful antibodies? Well, let's start with something I think people are familiar with, and that is when we have a childhood infection, measles, German measles, mumps, whatever, chickenpox. When we have a childhood infection and recover, as almost everyone does, we are left with protective, helpful, neutralizing antibodies, IgG, long-lived antibodies, that actually do protect us. If after we get naturally protected, we get exposed to that infection while our immune system is still functioning, before we start burdening the cells of the immune system, the foreign invader will recognize the antibody, the neutralizing antibody. The antibody will wrap around the antigen, will bind itself to the antigen, and that will be taken out of circulation in the spleen or the liver, as it should be. So helpful antibodies, whether they're protecting you from measles or because you now have a neutralizing protective IgG antibody to wheat or to any other substance. The misunderstanding that is widespread is that if you have protection from childhood infection, you have a protective, neutralizing, helpful antibody. But if you have an antibody against wheat or food or a medicine, oh, well, that must be a harmful antibody. No, the immune system is agnostic. It knows self and not self. It knows you and not you. Anything that is not you will cause the immune system to attack it, to dismember it, to recycle it, to prevent it from getting to a deeper part of you. So neutralizing and helpful antibodies really are helpful. They're kind of a molecular sponge that circulates in the blood, remembering what was a previous invader. And if that invader comes back, they're designed specifically to complex with it, to neutralize it, and to then basically go into a lysosomal recycling center in a splenic or hepatic, in a spleen or liver cell. And so this doesn't burden the immune system. It actually helps reduce the burden on the immune system, because the foreign invader may get trapped in the lymph fluid, where there are no cells, or almost no cells, but you certainly do have the circulating antibodies. And in the plasma, if you have protective antibodies against corn or against cow dairy, and then it's misinterpreted that every time you see an antibody, oh, if it's a food, it must be a harmful one, you end up, from my point of view, creating two problems. First of all, you have people avoid things that they don't need to avoid, because you haven't distinguished in that IgG antibody whether it's helpful or harmful. But more importantly, you didn't interrogate or talk to the T cells. And if you miss the T cells, which are probably 2/3 of all delayed allergy reactions, are T cell based. They don't need antibody. They just directly, the lymphocytes directly activate in response to the antigen presenting cell or in response to the challenge. So we want to use the tests that are meaningful. We want to use tests that have good reproducibility. I would ask any lab that does complement tests what their CV, what their coefficient of variation is, plus or minus what on that number. Let's say they produce a number of 5. I'm saying that the best that any lab can do is 15% variance. So that means if the true number was 5, a 15% variance means you're going to get lab values between 4.25 and 5.75. Let me say that again. if you take 15% of 5, it would be easier if I did this with 10. Let's take 15% of 10. Let's say the number was 10 and the variance is 15%. Well, then you're going to get lab values between 8.5 and 11.5 when the true value is 10. And I'm saying that 8.5 will be interpreted differently than 11.5. So you have too much variation on a test that is intrinsically variable, that clinically, in my opinion, does not help you distinguish the beneficial from the harmful IgG antibodies.